Hello and welcome back to Speed Model. As promised last time, it is now time to turn to the pantry. Let's try and fix it up, make it all nice and fancy and a place you would actually want to be. You're watching episode 3 of Speed Model. After accidentally starting on the pantry last episode, we can now pick up where we left off. Continuing from the cabinet we made last time, I downloaded new texture to place over the cabinet surface. After coloring it up and making it seamless in GIMP, I pop back into Blender to use it. I take some time to figure out the UV mappings on the cabinet mesh. Because it has an irregular shape, computing the texture coordinates is a little harder. I also decide to tweak things up a little by changing the direction of the grain for one of the cabinet tops. While this creates a disconnect in the texture, it seems much more natural for the grain to run along the length of the cabinet. With that done, I begin modeling the doors for the cabinet. Once again, this is something you've seen me do countless times. The only difference this time is that everything is a little bit more carefully scaled. I duplicate the doors over to every part of the cabinet, thus completing it. Then I move on to build a little couch. As you can see, I drag the sitting scale figure for use as a rough guide to the height and width of the couch. Once again, these tricks aren't particularly new. I combine beveling with subdivision, which causes a mesh to round out very nicely. Perfect for couches, pillows, and anything meant to have an imperfect shape. It conveys a feeling of softness. I model back and armrest for the couch in a similar fashion. I decide to tweak up the surface of the couch so that it sags just a little, which hopefully conveys a bit more of a realistic feel. I achieve this by dividing the mesh into roughly 3 parts along its length and extruding each seat region down slightly. While this would have been very jarring on its own, the subdivision smooths it all out. I duplicate the mesh once over, but find that it is way too wide. I decide to shrink it down to about the scale of a 2-seater, which allows it to not jut out in the way of the door. Of course, I soon realized that the little depressions I've made in the surface of the seat now look really weird when a couch is scaled down. I spent a little time messing about with the mesh to see how best to fix this up, but I ended up just leveling out the surface of the 2-seater. Then I turned my attention to the corner between the 2 couches, modeling a flower pot. The idea was to have a little potted plant in the corner. I start by getting all the textures ready, including downloading an external texture to fill up the pot with gravel. When I was satisfied with the look, I create a small plane and map it to a hair emitter. I mess about with the particle settings for a while, eventually settling on a configuration that uses Brownian noise to generate the plant leaves. I give it a nice texture so that the leaves have thickness. After a lot of messing around with the settings, I'm finally satisfied, moving on to a coffee table. The coffee table is a run-of-the-mill, fairly basic table, built out of a beveled cuboid and maps to transparency in the center. I built 4 table legs out of cuboids as well. After some final tweaks to the textures and positions of everything, I decided to move on once again and build some blinds for the window. You know, those typical office vertical blinds. I begin by building a rail portion at the top, scaled appropriately for the window. Then I create a single thin long strip, which will serve as the actual blind. I position it roughly and then use an array modifier to duplicate it many times over. This allows me to operate the blinds like, well, real blinds. By rotating just one of them, I can rotate up the entire array of blinds. I give it a little color, wrapping it up for the lounge area. I decide to add a little bit more to the pantry, duplicating the cabinets from the bottom to the top, and deleting part of the geometry so that the cabinet doesn't have to run the entire way. I spent some time fixing everything up and copying the doors over from the bottom row of cabinets. After tweaking up the lighting in a scene by doubling the number of lights available, I move on to add a sink to the cabinet, creating a proper kitchen counter vibe. Building a sink is also something you've seen before. The steps I'm using here are exactly the same as the last 2 times I've built a kitchen. Once again, building the faucet is done in a very similar way, but this time I build it by extruding it myself. With the faucet appropriately positioned, I also create a tap and texture up everything accordingly. With everything in position, it is now time for a render. I add a sunlight outside of the windows so that the blinds can cast nice fancy shadows. And this wraps up our modeling for today's episode. There you go, that is the pantry. Like I said at the end of the previous episode, we don't have all the details in just yet, but I'll be moving away for now. We'll come back at a later time to add those little details. You know, a cup on a coaster, coffee machine, microwave, that sort of stuff. Anyway, that's all there is for this episode. Thank you very much for watching. Until next time, you're watching 0612 TV. Thank you very much for watching. If you liked this video, consider checking out the rest of my work on my channel. Alternatively, you may be interested in the last season of Speed Model. If you'd like to show me some monetary support, I am on Patreon. You can find a link to my campaign in the video description. Of course, you can simply like this video or leave a comment. I'll be sure to respond as soon as I can. To keep in touch with my future uploads, do subscribe to this channel. And for even more updates, check out the official Twitter account for this channel at 0612TV. Thank you for your support.